I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Welcome to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. I'm registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and I'm your host. Today's episode is centered on creating your own customized nutrition plan. And we'll cover a lot of things. So if your goal is to lose weight, gain weight, maintain weight, but this is especially geared towards those who want to lose those extra pounds, lose that extra body fat. So this is going to be a step-by-step guide to help you do that and to give you the knowledge to help guide you in developing your own personalized nutrition plan. So I get asked this a lot of what should I eat? How much protein do I need? How much carbs do I need? And I'm always hesitant to answer this because the answer, and I don't like the answer, it depends, but that is the answer. And it varies so much. So I'm going to start by saying I'll be giving guidelines and general guidelines on how much protein, how much carb, timing of meals, all of this. This is very general across the broad population. This may not apply to you. It certainly does not apply to everyone. And of course, I would love everybody to meet with a registered dietitian one-on-one, wherever you are, whatever city you're in. You can search scan.org, I believe, has a lot of sports and wellness dietitians that you can find one in your area. Here in New Orleans, of course, we have Ochsner Fitness Center, which is where my job is, and our two dietitians, Alexis Weilbaecher and Hulin. They'll actually be joining me in a few episodes down the road where we'll be talking about similar things and also just kind of what all goes into sitting down and working with a dietitian and some of the hilarious stories that we've all encountered and some things that you could learn from. So, and have some good takeaways from. So with that being said, I am always hesitant to give numbers and to give broad guidance because it is absolutely not a one size fits all. And so y'all will kind of hear me hesitating on some things, I'm sure, as we go, because it's something that I don't love to do, but I get asked this so much that I want to provide at least what I can to get you started on your own. If you're not working with a dietitian, if maybe it's not in your budget, but reach out to a dietitian, whether it's Alexis or Lauren at Ochsner Fitness Center, and I'll put their contact information in our episode notes, or looking at scan.org. It's part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to find a dietitian in your area. Reach out to that dietitian, find out if they accept insurance. Alexis and Lauren, for example, we do accept insurance at Ochsner Fitness Center, and it doesn't always cover it, but they can check, they can let you know if it is or isn't covered, and then kind of go through what the different pricing packages are. So with that said, the episode coming up is going to be giving you the tools to help you at least start to develop your own customized nutrition plan. If you've already feel like you have a pretty solid base, then hopefully this will help you fine tune it and maybe kind of tweak it a little bit. We'll be looking at what types of foods are best to eat, how much to eat, and even when to eat, because it may seem insignificant, especially if it's not something you've really been paying a lot of attention to. But the timing of our meals and snacks can really make a huge difference in the level of success. So here's the deal. Every time you eat, we increase the number of calories that our body burns. It's called the thermic effect of food. Our body has to heat up to digest and absorb these foods that we eat. So we don't even have to eat a whole lot for it to happen. But when we do eat, this thermic effect of food is actually revving up our metabolic rate ever so slightly each time. That effect is actually greater for protein foods. It takes more calories to digest and assimilate and absorb protein-rich foods than it does, say, sugary foods or processed carbs. So protein-rich foods actually rev up our metabolism, rev up that thermic effect of food even more. So that's another benefit, of course, of having those. And when we're looking at timing, so I'll talk about intermittent fasting in just a minute, but for probably, I would say at least 80% of the people that I talk with, that I work with, I'm still looking at eating frequently through the day because for a bunch of reasons. One, that thermic effect of when we eat, that little rev that we get in that metabolic rate. But also, it can really help to keep our blood sugar stable, our insulin level stable. It helps to offset cravings. It just kind of keeps us feeling steady and solid through the day. So, we will talk about intermittent fasting coming up, and that is something that's completely different than eating often through the day. But for those who I would say at least the large 80% of the population that I think maybe don't want to do intermittent fasting or just your lifestyle, whatever it might be, that's not going to be a fit for you. Again, 80% of people, this is what I would recommend. Not going more than about 4 hours-ish without eating. Now, you don't have to eat the minute you wake up and get out of bed, but try to have something within the first 2 hours or so that you're up. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but I do like it to be something that is protein rich when we do have that first meal or whatever it is of the day. If you're not a big eater in the morning, but you are a coffee person, we've talked before about making that coffee work for you. So you can, instead of doing an iced coffee, you could use a high protein, ready to drink protein drink and put that with your cold brew coffee. You can stir protein powder or blend protein powder into hot coffee, or you can do it into cold coffee with ice and make kind of a blended frappe. So that coffee can also become protein rich if you're adding protein powder or collagen. It could be eggs in the morning. It could be, there's so many different things that we could do. So staying just on the idea of timing though, having something within at least 2 hours after you get up, and then not going longer than about 4 hours without a meal or a snack throughout the day. So if you're up at 6, try to have something by 8. If lunch is at 12, we don't need to squeeze in a morning snack. But if lunch is at 12, most of us aren't eating dinner as soon as 4. It might be 6, 7, 8 o'clock. We might need that snack at 4, and then we'll have dinner later. So that's kind of that timing that I would look at for most people. Now, when it comes to intermittent fasting, this is something that over the past 5 years, research has really, I feel like every time I'm looking at different news briefs about nutrition, there's some other study that has come out about the benefits of intermittent fasting. And we had actually done a challenge several summers ago, and an intermittent fasting challenge, and the feedback was just incredible. And it's something that when I first heard about it, I was really doubtful. But as I started looking more and more at the science, the brain benefits, the reduction of risk in Alzheimer's, the reduction in cravings. But what's also really crazy is that with intermittent fasting, a lot of people still lose significant bits of body weight, body fat, without losing muscle mass. And that's what I was really, really shocked about that. I would have been convinced that we would see a loss of muscle mass as well. But in almost every case, that muscle mass is maintained while that body fat drops. Now, intermittent fasting, I've actually done an entire podcast on intermittent fasting with Dr. Ian Smith, actually. He's an author of a book all about intermittent fasting. So if you're interested in that, scroll back through the podcast library for the Fueled Wellness podcast, and you'll see or you can hear the full one on intermittent fasting. But that might mean a 12-hour fasting window through the day, 14 hours, 16 hour, and then that fueling window that might be 8, 10, 12 hours, and that can be shifted around through your day of when you want it to be. So when we're talking about eating frequently through the day, not going more than 4 hours without eating, trying to have something within that first 2 hours after you wake up, that's for the large majority of the population. For someone who feels like they need something a little bit more extreme, or you feel like you need that real jump start to kind of gain control over things, intermittent fasting can be a good fit. But for a lot of people, things might be so far off the rails that just dialing it back and doing this frequent eating through the day is going to be a perfect fit. So I've seen incredible success from both of these. So there's absolutely no right or wrong. If intermittent fasting works for you, that's fantastic. If eating every few hours throughout the day works for you, that there's also a lot of proof that this is really beneficial for people. So the timing and those are two totally opposite totally counter approaches. So again, as I was saying, just kind of right at the beginning, it's not a one size fits all. That's a perfect example. Eating every few hours throughout the day might be the perfect fit for some people. Intermittent fasting might work better for others. And for a lot of people, both may actually still work really well for them. So when we're looking at timing, it's up to you to figure out what's going to be the best fit for you. But those are the two main approaches that I would look at. So as you are snacking or intermittent fasting your way to your leaner physique, you may think, okay, if I'm looking at timing, does it even really matter where my calories come from as long as I'm cutting back on how much I'm taking in? And the answer is absolutely 100% yes. It absolutely matters where our calories come from. So a lot of people will talk about their macros and they're looking, and that means macronutrients, and it's carbohydrates, fats, proteins. And they'll count their macros and they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm counting my macros. And they'll look at something and it might be cookies there's nothing nutritious about it. It's sugar, white flour. They're just full of carbs, but they've figured out how much carbohydrate, protein, and fat they think they should have through the day. And if those cookies fit within that number of carbohydrates, then they consider the cookies part of that plan as they're eating according, if it fits their macros. I'm not a big advocate of that. I don't like that at all. So I do, and we will talk about how much protein, how much carb, how much fat, and kind of the ranges to look at through the day. But I am not a believer in figuring out your macros. And if a food fits into those macros, no matter what it is, then it's good to go. I would look at that as being a splurge. Not to say that we're not going to have it, but I would definitely not look at things and just think, this fits my protein needs, or this fits my fat needs, or this fits my carbohydrate needs. If it's not a nutritious product, I would not want that to be part of our regular thing that we're putting into our bodies. So absolutely, it does matter where our calories come from. When we look at things like sugar and processed foods, these are what we call calorie dense, meaning they pack a lot of calories into a little space. And they can quickly max out our upper limit of calories for the day, which we'll be talking about all this numbers coming up. First, I'm talking just kind of types of foods. But let's just say you have your calorie limit that you want to aim for a day, that if you are a counter, not everybody's a counter, so we'll also address that. But whatever that range is that you decide is your goal that you want to have for your intake, if we're eating a lot of processed white carbs, breads, pastas, rice, or sweets, sugary candy type things, these can quickly max out that daily calorie upper limit. And the problem with that is there's nothing nutritious happening in there. So we're not getting vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, all the stuff that's like good for us on that cellular level. We're also not getting the protein, the fat, the fiber, things that are also good for us, not only on that cellular level, but also on how we're feeling right now. So when we eat white, processed, refined, or sugary carbs, we're on that roller coaster of energy, that roller coaster of blood sugar, and they're calorie dense. So we're maxing out our calorie allotment. We're not getting the nutrients we need. We're not eating foods that really satisfy us. And so we're quickly going to be hungry very soon if those are the things that we're reaching for. So we want to keep the emphasis as much as possible on lean proteins, vegetables, fiber-rich fresh fruits, whole grains, but keeping in mind that whole grains are really not any different, or not much different typically, in terms of calories and carbohydrates than their white counterparts. So it is better to do a brown rice or a sweet potato or a whole grain pasta than the white version, because that fiber is more satiating. Those foods are those whole grains. They haven't been refined. They haven't been processed so much. They're closer to their natural state. However, the carbs and calories aren't really much different. So just be aware of that. So looking at, okay, we need to make sure that we're choosing these foods wisely, plus making sure that we get enough protein throughout the day. And I'm talking to the group here who says, I want to lose body fat. I want to lose pounds. I want to see the number go down on the scale, or I want to see my clothes fit better. I want to see body fat coming down. Well, if that's the case, we need to make sure that we're getting enough protein throughout the day to prevent the loss of valuable muscle mass as you're dropping those extra pounds. So muscle is very metabolically active. That means even at rest, even just sitting or sleeping, that muscle mass burns a lot more calories at rest than our fat does. And when we're exercising and we're moving, it's burning a lot more calories. So the more muscle, plus all the things that we need it for, balance, strength, as we age, we need to be sure that we're keeping as much muscle mass as possible. So these are things that, as we're cutting calories, the first priority, or one of the first priorities I'm looking at, is making sure we're not skimping on that protein. So with that first time you're eating through the day, whether it's intermittent fasting time or your normal within 2 hours and then every 4 hours through the day, every meal and snack you reach for, my recommendation is to make sure you have a source of protein. So you might add an egg or cheese or nut butter, a protein bar, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese. You can do vegetarian or vegan options as well that are going to give us that source of protein. So the key though is to make sure, if you're reaching for a snack that is an apple and whole grain crackers, that's carb and carb. We're not getting that source of protein. Instead, I'd rather see fruit paired with cottage cheese or Greek yogurt or nut butter or something like that. At lunch and dinner, my typical recommendation is to have a source of lean protein that's roughly the size of your palm. And that's your palm, how thick it is, how big around your palm is, minus your fingers. And so for most women, it's about 4 ounces, 5 ounces. I do want to point out that it's the size of your palm, not your spouse's or your kid's palm. It's yours. I say that because a lot of times let's just say that protein portion from the store that you're getting is 5-ounce chicken breast or whatever. That might be fine for a woman, but her partner, who is, 6'2", kind of a broad, let's just say it's a 6'2" broad male. If you looked at the size of his palm, it might be twice the size. It might be 8 ounces, 10 ounces. And if they're eating the same size amount of protein, then probably, I can't tell you how many times, like a wife will roll her eyes about the husband, like, we have dinner and then, oh my gosh, he just keeps eating. He's snacking so much after dinner. And when we kind of dive into, well, how much is he having? They're essentially having the same amount. Well, of course, he's starving. Like, we almost need to double that amount of protein for him. So protein with lunch and with dinner, the size of your palm. I find that at dinner, it's more common. People are going to have fish or chicken or beans, some sort of legume or a non-meat version of protein. And we are wrapping that into dinner pretty well. At lunch, I find, is where people can really easily skimp on it. So we may have these gorgeous salads filled with all types of vegetables, but unless we're really strategically trying to add that protein to it, we've got a very vitamin, nutrient-rich salad, but we don't have a lot of protein in it. Or if someone's making a sandwich, especially if they're trying to lose those extra pounds, they may make a sandwich with just like a couple of really thin slices of turkey or whatever, and it might only be an ounce worth versus that 4 or 5 ounces. So I find at lunch, it's really more common that people skimp on that protein than it is at dinner. But so basically, I would say palm size amount of protein at lunch, at dinner, your palm size at lunch and at dinner, and then just making sure you do have some source of protein with your breakfast, with your snacks. Now, again, if you're doing something like intermittent fasting, same thing applies to when you do eat during that fueling window, still making sure we have that. So as for carbohydrates, most people, and again, I'm speaking to those of you whose goal is to drop extra pounds, drop some extra body fat. So let's think about the timing of carbohydrates. It makes the most sense to have these foods. Carbohydrates are energy boosting. When we eat carbohydrates, it gives us that quick release of energy. So it makes the most sense to have those energy boosting foods earlier in the day when your body and your brain can really use the lift. You don't want to overdo it. Most people can get by with one type of starchy carb or one type of carbohydrate for breakfast, for lunch, for a snack. So again, if you have oatmeal at breakfast, for example, pass on the whole grain toast. If you have a sandwich for lunch, you may not also need the crackers. And keep in mind that things like fresh fruit, milk, a lot of yogurts have as much or more carbohydrate or even more carbohydrates. And keep in mind that foods like fresh fruit, milk, even a lot of yogurts have as much, if not more, carbohydrate than a serving of bread, rice, pastas, potatoes. So if you do have fresh fruit, then definitely don't put it with a high carb flavored yogurt. If you have fresh fruit, again, like we said earlier, pair it with cottage cheese, Greek yogurt, nut butter. But when it comes to carbohydrates and we're looking at how we're timing them through the day, one thing that I'll strongly encourage is to try to minimize these carb rich starches at nighttime. So we're not saying that these are just inherently bad. We're not saying that at all. But these foods do have a lot of nutrients in them, but most of us don't need that big load of energy boosting, calorie dense carbohydrates right before bedtime. So we're about to go to sleep. We don't need to fuel up our bodies for sleep. And cutting out that cup or 2 cups of starch, even if it's whole grain starch, it's just an easy way to cut 200, 400 or more calories for dinner. And it makes it easier and it makes you want to put more vegetables in to kind of fill that space. So, carbohydrates, looking at having them earlier in the day and looking at pulling them back and dialing back on them at night. Now, is that a hard and fast rule? No. Are there a lot of people who do have some sort of starchy carb at night and they're still losing extra body fat? Of course. This is all these things that I'm talking about in this episode are things that over my 20 years of working with clients, over and over and over, we find effective. And a lot of times I would work with someone and we would have a serving of whatever kind of starchy carb at dinner. And by the way, a serving of starchy carb like rice or pasta or potatoes, a serving is what fits into a cupcake wrapper. That's it. It's not much at all. So when we're looking at what a serving is and versus what we're often having, we may be easily having 3, 4, or more servings at dinner, even if we don't think it looks like a whole lot. Again, what fits into a cupcake wrapper is what's a serving of rice, pasta, potatoes, or any kind of starchy grains like that. So, how much are we having? So, over the years, when I've seen, even if someone's like, I'm doing just half of a cup of starch, and they're not seeing any shift in how their clothes are fitting or anything like that, then we really will say, okay, well, let's try pulling that out at night, not having that starchy carb at night. And over time, with most people, it is beneficial. So again, not a hard and fast rule, not always what's going to be best for everyone, but that is what I see effective for a lot of people. The other thing I would say is what are you using as your measuring stick on this? And we don't want it to be just the scale. So if you are eating starchy carbs at night, for example, carbohydrates hold water. They bind to water in our systems and our bodies. So if we did eat a high carb meal, for example, we're going to see more fluid on the scale the next day. I'm fine with people weighing themselves. I think that a lot of people can have a very healthy relationship with the scale, but you know yourself. And if you don't have that healthy relationship with the scale, ditch it. Use other ways to gauge your progress, whether it's that one pair of pants that you know you're trying those on a regular basis, maybe weekly, and you can kind of see how those are fitting. Whatever your way is of gauging your progress, the scale is often not going to be the best determinant for a lot of people. So I definitely do want to mention that. So when it comes to protein, with each meal and snack through the day, we want to make sure we've got that source in there. When it comes to carbs, keeping them earlier in the day, realizing that things like fruit, yogurt, milk have just as much carbohydrate as bread, rice, pasta, and considering limiting these at night. And when it comes to fats, this is really the wild card. And this varies a lot for people. And so I definitely don't have what I would say is kind of an average. This is where, it is very individual. So I may have people who, I guess I typically don't want anything to be fat-free that we have. So I do want to make sure that with every meal and snack, we're also having some type of fats. Fats have a lot of benefit for us. They help with our good cholesterol. They help with metabolism. We need fats for hormone production. So we need to have fats throughout our day. And when people follow a very, very low fat diet, they're often very hungry and they often have a lot of cravings. And their diets tend to be much higher in carbohydrate than what I would typically recommend. So we definitely want to make sure that we are not cutting our fats too low. And if someone likes a low fat option like 2% milk or the low fat Greek yogurt, 2% Greek yogurt, those are fine. They still do have some fats. But if something is just a fat free version of the real thing, I typically don't like it. A lot of times they're adding more filler, more carbs, more gums, more modified food starch. A lot of times it doesn't taste nearly as good. We may have told ourselves over time that it does, but if you tasted the real thing, it tastes vastly different. And again, if it's completely fat free, that's not good either. So making sure that whatever you're having, you do have some source of fats with each meal, with each snack. So those of you who are numbers people may want to know, okay, well, how many calories do I need? I like to count. I want to use a fitness tracker, MyFitnessPal. Some people, I still have clients of all ages who like to keep a pen and paper. They like to write that journal down in their counters. They want to count their calories, count their protein, their carb, their fat. They want to look at all these things. Other people have zero interest in that. So for those of you who are counters and you want to know these numbers, our calorie requirements depend on a lot of different factors. And so again, as I've been saying throughout, it's impossible to give a guideline that's going to fit across the board. So everything that I'm saying is going to be for the large majority, but is definitely not for everyone. It might not be for you, but it may at least give you a starting point. And again, I highly recommend, if you can, sit down with a registered dietitian and find something that's truly tailored to you. One thing also, when we talk about calories, we can do actually resting calorie expenditure tests, like resting energy expenditure test. How many calories do you burn at rest? So at Ochsner Fitness Center, for example, we can determine this with just a simple breathing test. So then we're not completely shooting in the dark. We do see, okay, we take this breathing test. It measures oxygen in, CO2 out. It's looking at this gas exchange, and it helps us see how many calories you burn over the course of 24 hours in a general resting state. And then we can add in for your activity. So if your job is very sedentary or your job is very active, and we add in for what's considered your purposeful exercise. So meeting with a dietitian, especially if we're able to do something like the resting metabolic test, can really tailor it much more specifically to you than what I'm about to say. So calorie requirements vary a lot. So it's based on our size, our weight, how much muscle mass do we have, how active are we, again, with that purposeful exercise through the day, but also just our jobs, our daily activity that we're not even thinking of as exercise. If you look at someone whose job is at a desk versus a mail carrier, those are going to be really different calorie expenditures. And then also genetics play a huge role in metabolism. And so no matter what kind of charts you're using that are based on your age, your height, your weight, your gender, we still don't know exactly what's happening inside with your genetic makeup, with everything else. But again, that resting metabolic test can give us a little bit more insight. So in spite of these variations, though, there are some pretty simple guidelines that you can use. And I would say these numbers are conservative because a lot of times when we're gauging how much we eat, we also tend to overestimate. So looking at these numbers being a little bit more conservative. So for a person whose goal is to lose extra weight, lose extra body fat, typically we'd recommend about 10 calories per pound of your goal body weight. So if your goal body weight is 140 pounds, then 10 calories per pound of your goal body weight would be 1,400 calories. Bump that up to 12 calories per pound of goal body weight if you exercise pretty moderately 3 to 4 days a week, and bump it even higher to 14 calories per pound of goal body weight if you exercise pretty intensely most days of the week. So 10 calories per pound of goal body weight is rock bottom. If you're moderately active, go with 12 calories per pound of goal body weight. And if you're really active on most days, then 14 calories per pound of goal body weight. Again, people either love counting numbers or they hate counting numbers. So if you hate counting numbers, just hang tight with us for a bit. We're going to get past this part. So that's what I would look at for just calories for the day. Then your target protein and carbohydrate ranges, these are also relative to that goal body weight. So looking at what your goal body weight, again, let's use that example. If your goal body weight is 140 pounds, aiming for at least, when it comes to protein, aiming for at least half a gram up to 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight. So what that would mean is if your goal is 140 pounds, we don't want to go below 70 grams of protein. And then we would say our range would be 70 to 140 grams of protein. Again, I know that's a huge range, but again, there's so much variation in people's tendencies, their preferences. There's a lot of people who really don't like many protein-rich foods, and it's a struggle for them to meet even 70 grams of protein a day. Others who really love it are easily going to hit that 140 target. So that range is huge, but I would still base it off of your goal body weight, anywhere between half a gram of protein to 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight. The exception, of course, is if you're exercising really intensely, if you're training for a marathon, a triathlon, if you've recently had an injury, a surgery, you are probably going to need more protein, and you also would likely need more calories for performance, for recovery, for repair. So again, this is all very, very general. When it comes to carbohydrates, I usually, if someone's goal is to gain weight, or if weight's not an issue, I'm not worried. I'm not looking really closely at their carbohydrate intake. If weight's not an issue and they're in a really healthy weight maintenance, they're doing already a really good job of balancing these macronutrients. They're doing a good job of balancing carbohydrate, protein, fat, calories. If their muscle mass, their body fat is in a good maintenance range. But for those, again, who are aiming to actively lose body fat, you want to lose those extra pounds, I'll generally say let's try not to go over 1 gram of carbohydrate, 1 gram of carbohydrate per pound of goal body weight daily. So again, using that example, your goal body weight is 140 pounds. Try not to exceed 140 grams of carbohydrate. And I'll really often do that same range that I do for protein, 0.5 to 1 grams of carbohydrate per pound of goal body weight. So if I have someone who's been doing a really low carb diet, keto, for example, or any of the other historically low carb diets, they may be in the 20 grams of carbohydrate range. So when I say, okay, your goal is 140, aiming anywhere from 70 to 140 grams of carbs, they think I have lost my mind because they're at 20 max. And so to them, 70 just seems absolutely insane. The reality is we get a lot of those carbohydrates from things like vegetables. We get it from fruits. We get it from yogurt. We can easily get 20, 30 grams or more just from those things without even thinking of it, just from eating a varied diet, high in vegetables, fruits, and dairy like Greek yogurt. So if someone is doing a diet like keto, obviously all these numbers are out the window. That's a whole different deal. What we're talking about here is kind of general, big picture plan that someone is looking at. There's so many other things that someone might be doing that are going to be much more prescribed, I guess is the word. And so this is not that conversation that we're having, but we have done also a full podcast on keto. I mentioned we've done a full podcast on intermittent fasting. In several episodes, I will have our dietitians, Alexis and Lauren, here, and we'll be diving even more into this. So this is kind of for the general population. Again, doesn't apply to everyone. And if you are doing something like a keto diet, or you're doing any other type of diet of the minute, of the moment, it's going to be probably much more prescribed, and these numbers are likely not going to fit with what you're doing. And finally, fat. I mentioned that I don't want to go very low fat. I always want to have a source of fat with each meal and snack. If we're looking at numbers for that, it might be as low as 35 grams of fat a day for someone, up to maybe 70 or more. It depends on kind of, again, what their needs are, what their habits are, what their food likes and preferences are. I would definitely just make sure that we're not edging on the side of too little fat. And that fat, again, is that wild card because if we're dialing back our carbs, we're making sure we keep that protein in there, but we feel better. We don't feel like we need a lot of starchy carbs, and we're getting them through vegetables, we're getting them through Greek yogurt or whatever it might be. That might leave a little bit more room for fats in there. And if those fats are things like avocado, these plant-based fats, nuts, seeds, et cetera, nut butters, those are going to be really nutritious additions to our diet. And so I would absolutely love and encourage someone to do avocado, olive oil, nut butters, almonds, any of these plant-based fats or higher omega-3 fats that are, say, fish oil, salmon, et cetera, that's going to have higher fats. I would much rather these plant-based and fish-based, sea-based fats than white carbs. So if someone can dial back pasta, rice, potato, and replace it with some of these plant-based and seafood-based oily fish fats, I'm super happy. And again, the amount of fat is going to vary a lot based on that person's age, height, weight, gender, genetics, everything else that we're looking at. But that's typically going to be the wild card. So I look at protein in relation to our body weight, goal body weight. I look at carbs in relation to our goal body weight. And then that fat is going to be the wild card. If you weren't a big protein eater and you kind of struggle to get that lower limit of protein, again, your fats might be a little higher. Same thing with carbs, your fats might be a little higher. So if these numbers have your head spinning, don't worry. You don't have to count, and you absolutely do not have to count calories, carbs, protein, fat in order to have a really nutritious diet. You can use fitness trackers. MyFitnessPal is one of the most popular, but there's so many different apps that you can download and track that way, or you can do it if you're not an app person. Of course, you can do it on a desktop. You can do old school pen and paper, but you don't have to count it. But if you're using those fitness trackers or apps, they do the counting for you. But even if you don't care about the numbers, still just kind of think about those big picture things. If you're not into intermittent fasting, that's not your thing. You want to eat throughout the day, and that's kind of what you're comfortable with, and that's worked for you in the past, then I would look at not going more than 4 hours through the day, making sure we have that source of protein each time we eat, make sure we're not dropping our fats too low. If you look at a meal or a snack and you go, man, this whole thing is entirely fat-free, what can we do to change it so it's not? It might be going from fat-free yogurt to 2%. It might be adding a few slices of avocado or getting those little go packs of like holy guacamole avocado spread or something, which is basically just pureed avocado in there. It could be adding a handful of nuts to something. There's just a lot of ways that we can make sure that we have some source of fats in there so that it's not completely fat-free. And then again, when we're looking at carbs, making sure we're not, if our goal is to dial back, and our goal is to shed that extra body fat, extra weight, being real careful about how much carbs we have, realizing they don't keep us as full longer, they're not as satisfying as long. And so where we have them through the day, so we're going to have that protein with every meal and snack. Make sure we have a source of fats with every meal and snack. Carbs, though, keeping these earlier in the day, dialing them back as much as we can at night. Again, not a hard and fast rule, but works for a lot of people pretty well. So I would look more at these types of foods: protein the size of your palm at lunch and dinner. I would look at these as general guidelines if you're not a counter and you're not a numbers person. So again, everyone is so different. What works for one person nutritionally is going to be vastly different from another. And also how we approach nutrition. Some people approach it in a very scientific manner. Others really just want it to be an organic flow and kind of not even have to give it that much thought. So I'm always hesitant to talk about numbers and provide these specifics when we're talking to a big cross section of people. So I can't say it enough. I would encourage you to use these as a starting point. If you or kind of had no idea where to start, this can give you that baseline. If you already feel like you had a pretty good thing going, then use this to kind of cross-reference what you've been doing, and you might find some areas that you can tweak it a bit. And then finally, look for a dietitian in your area. If you're in New Orleans, reach out to us at Oshner Fitness Center. We have Alexis Weilbaecher, Lauren Hulin. We have the resting metabolic test there. We can really kind of get that peek of what's happening inside and make this a lot more tailored and a lot more customized for you. So I hope that this has given you some takeaways, some that you can learn from and start incorporating. And I'm sure a lot of you listening may say, I fundamentally disagree with key parts of that, especially if you're doing something like keto or you're very 100% vegan. You may not agree with the carb recommendations that we talked about or the protein recommendations, but realize that this is for that general broad-based population. I would say, this is a really good starting point for a lot of people, especially if you've been looking for where do I even get myself together and where do I even start? So I will have the contact information for Alexis and Lauren that I mentioned in the episode notes. I'll also have a little cheat sheet with those numbers on calories, protein, and carbohydrates based on our body weight. And let me know what you think. And if you've got some feedback on this, I would love to hear it. I am Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life possible.